Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Well, here we are. We're back around the table for On the Ledge. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is the Ontario Politics Podcast, of course, with Keith Leslie and John Wright. And we're joined again this weekend by Sabrina Nanji at the Queen's Park Observer. And, you know, I just think as we kind of get set for this weekend, the penultimate weekend of October, finally getting into some discussion about stepping out of step 3. Today happens to be, as we record, the day we get to use our QR codes officially because it's the 22nd of October. But I think, Sabrina, the whole rollout of the QR codes, we were talking about this last week and how it was managed or communicated. You know, I think it kind of flared up for about 48 hours because they had some technical issues. But for the most part, you know, I think you got to give them credit at least for doing it early because there were going to be some challenges. It would seem that heading into this first full weekend where the QR codes are available and usable, it would appear that most people are on board and we're moving ahead technically with this stuff now.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Maybe everyone was just expecting it to be a disaster or have more hiccups, maybe because of some past rollouts of pandemic times from this government. But no, I think, you know, it, relatively speaking, it went pretty smoothly. I did hear, you know, just anecdotally from people who had a bit of trouble downloading it. Like my dad was asking me for help in doing it. But I think, you know, it was for the most part straightforward. I will confess that I had to call to get mine because I have my old health card still, but I have the old red and white card. So, you know, but even that was pretty, you know, pretty straightforward and easy enough for me to do. You know, keep in mind the receipts are still going to be in place just in case, you know, you don't have a smartphone or you can't figure it out. So I think the real test now is going to be, you know, the application of it. Obviously, businesses are going to have to scan it. They're going to have to, you know, make sure and verify, obviously, these types of things. If there's an exemption, the public health unit's going to have to verify it. That seems like quite a bit of legwork. So I think we're going to have to see how it rolls out now. And hopefully it'll be as smooth as it's been so far.
Yeah, I'm on Team Red and White as well. And the funny thing is I got mine on the Monday when everybody could finally get in at the same time. I spent more time listening to the pre-recorded preamble on the phone than I did with actually a live person who emailed me the link, and I got it like that. So yeah, it was fairly easy to do. And so heading out for breakfast with the boys, the buddies tomorrow, get to use my QR code. I'm so excited. So, you know, but at the same time, John, we're still hearing complaints from, you know, the restaurateurs or retailers who are thinking, you know, why is it on us to have to check this? And I think we're going to have to check that complaint at some point because we've all got to sort of somehow take responsibility for this. I don't understand how the government could otherwise do better than what we're doing in terms of having a receipt or a QR code at the door.
And if I'm not mistaken, and correct me, Sabrina, if I am, but I think one of the downloads for this is actually the scanner code. Is it not? I mean, that you can actually scan them. So if anything, the government has made it easier for people to go in and out. So I guess the thing that I've always wondered from the outset is how you deputize an entire industry to kind of enforce your regulations. There's not another sector that I'm aware of that is forced to stop people and, you know, actually regulate them in the same way because there are so many of them across the province. So I don't know when that's going to come to an end, but I'd be interested to see, you know, what the government's going to do this coming week. Is it full capacity that they're going to let everybody go in, or is it part capacity still? Are we, you know, how are they going to deal with the spaces and all that sort of stuff? I'm all for kind of opening up sooner rather than later completely. But I would be very curious as to how the government's going to, whether they're going to adopt that or whether there's going to be some other measure put in place.
Yeah, Keith, I was talking about this on the radio last weekend and the idea that, you know, why are we so hesitant about doing this? And I kept getting pushback from people saying, well, you know, you got to be careful because once we get into these settings and it could spread, and look what happened back, you know, a year ago or a year and a half ago. And I said, That was a year and a half ago. We didn't have nearly 85% of the population, eligible population, vaccinated. We didn't have certification that you were, in fact, vaccinated, and that was required at the door. We still have the mask mandate in most of these places. You can't compare it to even a year ago. Things have changed so much, and for the better, that I think this abundance of caution, there's an overabundance of caution here.
I think people are, as John says, more than ready and willing to open up, be a little less cautious as we go forward. I think the masks indoors will stay for a little bit longer than we'd expect, perhaps well into next year. But I think other things, the gatherings, the capacity limits, come on, it's time to stop dealing with that. On the QR codes, I found it interesting. When I went to see the new Bond movie, I had my QR code and I scanned it and checked it. I didn't have my ID. I had to go back to my car and get ID to see a movie. It didn't sit right with me. Like all of a sudden, no, that's getting up my nose. What do you need to see my ID for? My QR code says I'm good. Now, I did not give the poor person checking me in any hassle. This was just all in my mind. But you can see how people get irritated with this kind of stuff. Really? I need to show ID to go to a movie? Now,
the last time you had to do that, you were trying to sneak into a restricted movie and you were a teenager.
This is very, very different. This Bond is not restricted. Bond was restricted when I was a kid. They're not restricted now. But now last night, I went to a restaurant and they had their QR scanner working. And the owner and us, it was all like a bit of excitement. Look, you're verified. Yay. And then the same one was yay. So it's actually... I think because it's working so well that it'll be very quickly adapted and just become part of the routine. I really do. It seemed to go very, very smoothly after some initial. There's always going to be some hiccups. Government doing IT stuff, come on. This is actually bonus marks for getting it done in a week, and it's going on this well. As I say, I'm more put out by having to show my ID to go with my QR code, but that's hardly a big issue at this point in time. We're on the right side of this, and as you say, Dave, it's no longer comparable. And if people are willing to go to concerts and football and hockey games and sit side by side screaming and singing and, the Raptors game, everybody, yeah! And then we can't go sit in a restaurant. So, come on. It's time to ease a lot of those restrictions. And that's why we're there. That's why we're at that stage. You say it's not at all comparable to a year and a half ago. They said we needed to get the vaccines done. We, for 85% or more, have done exactly that. And now it's time for the rewards.
I want to get to the healthcare workers and the apparent crisis around that. And I put that in air quotes because I'm not sure. Again, it kind of falls into the same area. But I hate to give this oxygen. I really do. But we have to talk about Randy Hillier. And earlier this week, Sabrina, he posted this, montage of photographs of people that he says died as a result of complications due to vaccines or some, who were somehow COVID related. And there are families now coming out, and there's not just one or two, there's several I've seen online, have come out and said, hey, well, wait a minute. First of all, whoever died had nothing to do with a COVID situation or complication. And the second thing is, what are you doing kind of just exposing this and our family to your vitriol and all of the bullshit that is going on around it? Because what's happening now is the anti-vaxxers who are following Hillier are, actually going after some of these families. I don't know what you do about it or what's the tone at the park around this, but surely we got to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Randy Hillier has definitely gone a little too far in this case. I don't know. I think a lot of people might have said that he did that a while back. He's very skeptical about COVID. He's, aligned himself with anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers. I haven't even really seen him at Queen's Park because you need to now show either a negative test or proof of vaccination. He's been in trouble with the speaker about masking there, but this goes a little far, bringing in families. It's just personal. And, he refused to back down when he was asked about this. He just, did not apologize, dug in his heels. I mean, I think that this is a really dangerous game. And you're right. I don't know what can be done about it. I think that a lot of people at Queen's Park are a little hesitant now to even give Randy Hillier, oxygen or space, because I think, they're worried about, how he can galvanize the anti-vax movement right now.
Well, here's the latest tweet. The unvaxxed are being excluded and segregated from society. Is it time we leave this sick and diseased society and create a new one based on freedom? I would say there's the door, pal. Go
Listen,
ahead.
Hillier lost the plot long time ago in this stuff. He really did, and he seems to have lost his shit even more at this point in the game. He responded to these families' very legitimate, stop using our dead relatives for your ridiculous cause, by saying the police should investigate all these deaths because they were caused by the vaccine. I don't know. I think it's time that the legislature censure this man, whether he shows up in the House or not, and he's not abiding by the rules, but the legislature can censure him, and they should. It's time. Come on, you can't, no one wants to give him oxygen. He's got all the oxygen he needs with his followers and his supporters, and the Maxime Berniers and the PP. He's got all those people on his side. He's got a lot of followers and support out there, those same ones that are now attacking these families to some degree online. Come on. Time to send a really clear message. He's not, they complain about Premier Ford dog whistling or racist stuff and that. This guy's not dog whistling. He's out and out just blatantly lying and involving families who have lost people to COVID. How over the top outrageous is that? Come on, rein this man in now.
You know what, though? We have 8 months, and then he probably won't be heard from again. I mean, he will be in certain groups that he will, because he'll want to carry on with his own, fame and PPC and all that sort of stuff. He will have a home, but 90% of the people in his riding are in fact vaxxed. And part of that is a proxy for, saying to him, screw you. I mean, that's all there is. They don't want to be labeled as being part of his organization and part of his way of thinking. So they've all gone the other way. The second thing is, I mean, you're right, Keith. They could do this. They could censor him. It does, though, fly in the face of the whole don't give him oxygen and all that sort of stuff. And plus, the censure, I'm not really sure, has any impact whatsoever on people like this. The question I have, and again, I turn to you, Sabrina, because you're right there in the House day in and day out, and I'm not. How much does he actually believe this stuff? I mean, there are people who will, like Jason Kenney, who will, at 28% approval ratings in Alberta, with barely, if any, hope of being reelected to the next term, turn around and say the equalization payments, look like this, when in fact they don't. He'll go after Quebec day in and day out. He'll get on his hind legs. He'll do all of this stuff because it's the only chance he has of having any political future, to make that his proxy, that equalization pays money every day into the back pockets of Quebec, and it comes right out of the ground and from the people of Alberta. So I don't think he believes it, but he has to do it for political expediency. How much of this is Randy Hillier in his belief issues, and how much of it is simply his ability to try and stay alive in, some kind of electoral fashion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because obviously we even saw in the federal election, a lot of PPC support, especially in Ontario, and Randy Hillier was out rallying with Maxime quite a bit. And don't forget that Randy Hillier now is an independent MPP. He has the ability to fundraise outside of a specific campaign period, so he can raise money to run, in his own thing or with another party maybe. But I think. The thing about Randy is that even when I always, I guess maybe up until pandemic times, I'll admit I had a bit of a soft spot for him. He's this self-described libertarian. He's kind of a rebel. He's been a thorn in the side of every PC leader before Doug Ford. I guess Doug Ford was just the one that ended up giving him the boot. But I kind of did, have a bit of a soft spot for that. I could respect it. He's kind of, championed himself as being someone who doesn't, drink the Kool-Aid, and he's got these principles. But I think that this is, at this point, this is like dangerous, and it's against public health. So I do think Randy does believe these things, from a rights perspective, at least. I don't know what his thoughts are on, the actual health of things. Like we've heard Rick Nichols, the other progressive conservative who got kicked out for refusing to get vaccinated. We've heard him up in the House calling the COVID vaccine an experimental drug. And so, at least Hillier is not going that far, I guess. I mean, obviously they're both problematic, but I think that Randy is more about the principle of it, the rules, the state having control. I guess that's what I think is going to be the hill that he's willing to die on.
He's a hardcore libertarian, but of course, we got to go back to even before he was elected, before he caused all those PC leaders a lot of trouble. He was head of the Rural Landowners Association, or the Lanark Rural Landowners, and that's when he sent the Liberal government, remember, the picture of the dead deer, which he wrote on it, Leona, who was the minister at the time, Leona Dombrowski, Liberal minister. Over-the-top actions are Randy's calling card. He's always been that way. He's always been a maverick. And like Sabrina, I kind of enjoyed covering him when he was in the legislature, in the PC caucus, because he was outspoken and a rebel, and he didn't follow all their dictates and rules. But there comes a point where, you know, not following the rules is one thing of a party. And we're not talking about society's rules, society's request to get through this pandemic, global society's request. And, you know, being a contrarian is one thing, but being, you know, taking libertarian to the extreme where you're now involving families who've lost people to COVID and claiming that, you know, they're victims of a vaccine, that's just, you know, it should be, quite frankly, considered hate speech at this point. You're really attacking these poor families for no valid reason.
So let me just take this a step further, because, you know, when we talk about the issues around vaccines and vaccine mandates, and we're seeing now the number of hospitals across the province are starting to, you know, initiate those mandates. And the most recent story is about Sick Kids Hospital, about the healthcare workers and those who just, even admin workers, who are on suspended or paid leave until they get their vaccines. But we're moving forward on this. And the hospitals themselves, as an example, are taking a leadership role on this. Let me put it to you guys, that the longer the government, the Ford government, delays or sits on its hands around decisions around mandatory vaccines in healthcare settings specifically, the longer it looks as though they're failing to take a leadership role on it, because the hospitals are just doing their own thing. It lends itself then to criticisms in the extreme that they are somehow in line with a guy like Randy Hillier. It lends itself to the narrative that the federal conservatives can't get their act together on vaccines still, where this week we're talking about them voting against having a mandate in the House of Commons. This is going to the, John, it goes to the conservative brand, and I put that in air quotes because I realize there's the progressive conservatives in Ontario, the Conservative Party of Canada. They're going to tell you that they're two different animals politically, and most people are looking at this thinking they're all the same. This is not going to be good for the brand, I would think, as we're heading into a serious election campaign, because I can see it making sort of the backbone of an ad campaign against Doug Ford.
Well, but I mean, that's why Doug Ford has done what he has done to his own caucus. As soon as possible, he was out there saying, if you don't have it, you're out. I mean, if you look at the places across this country where there has been a real problem in dealing with COVID, they have been that Maclean's cover of all the conservative leaders, whether it be Scott Moe, who's now, you know, dealing with it, or Jason Kenney, or Doug Ford was for a period of time. I mean, Andrew Scheer, I mean, it's very interesting. Andrew Scheer is one of the, you know, in a circumstance where he's got these MPs who have said that they aren't going to do this.
Sorry, you mean Aaron O'Toole?
Who did I say?
Andrew Scheer. You're still hung up on him, I know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Sorry, I was looking at the windows and saw the drapes.
Hey, Andrew Scheer should be happy. He made an impression on someone.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
That's right.
You know, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I don't mean to diverge completely from this, but I did meet with some people in my very first breakfast meeting yesterday in over a year and a half. And we were sitting there at the Royal York, and they had arrived, and one of them was from the United States, and the other one was from out west. And the guy from the United States is Canadian, but he says to me afterwards, he says, you know, what Aaron O'Toole has done, he's gone because of what's happened in Alberta. I mean, those guys are going to separate. Those oil guys are going to put billions of dollars into it, and it's blah, 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 blah. And it's kind of like, I said to him, what's changed in the since I was first a parliamentary intern at Queen's Park in 1980? Like, really, there was the McKechnie budget, there was Mark Lalonde, there was Ed Clark and the oil thing. Like, I actually remembered these things, Red Square. Nothing has changed since that time. So I guess to that point, I then turned to him because he said, you know, well, Aaron O'Toole's gone because of this COVID vaccine thing. And it's kind of like, yeah, but I've heard that as well, too. Like, I've heard all of these arguments. And I guess I look at it this way and sort of say, at what point do the conservatives themselves say that that it's the liberals federally and it's other parties who do swallow their principles, because all I ever hear from conservatives is we have to stand in our principles. We have to do the right thing. And that is why 66% of the time in this country, we've had the liberals run the country, because all they're interested in, frankly, is power. I mean, that's what it seems to have come down to in my life looking at this. So to your point, Dave, whether you're Andrew Scheer or whether you're Aaron O'Toole or whether you're Doug Ford, they represent a minority, a vast minority of the population when these people stand up. And at what point do they basically say, we're moving forward. If you're not here and you're not vaccinated, then you're not going to get a job. You're not going to do X, Y, and Z. And the same with those people in caucus. So I find it interesting that it's the conservatives who have managed it the worst across the country, in other parts of the country. It's also the conservatives who are most likely to stand up and fight for the rights of those people to manage it as bad as they do. But it's also the conservatives who continually lose these election campaigns because of those very stands. And maybe Doug Ford's getting ahead of it right now by basically having said to his own people, you're out if you don't get it. But there's this dichotomy where he then hesitates about implementing it for the wider group of the population. I don't understand that.
For the first time, I do. For the first time, I give him some reason for pause here, and that's we can't afford the losses of the healthcare workers and long-term care. I get that. For the first time, I agree why he's going cautiously here. On the other hand,
it's already happening. It's already happening where they're actually laying people off, and the hospitals are managing it themselves. So this whole
I agree
air of what's the crisis? It's the same as John Snowblin. We have created a crisis,
but the stores are managing it themselves. The restaurants are managing it themselves. So they're clearly, if they didn't want to do it for those sectors, they're not going to do it for the healthcare when there's a risk of pushing out workers that they desperately need. And the staffing crisis, especially in long-term care. And in the nursing sector generally, now with the burnout that's going on after COVID, they have to address that, and they can't address it by forcing this issue, even though most of us, I think almost all of us, simply don't understand why anyone would be a healthcare worker and not want a vaccine. I don't understand that still, but I understand the government's dichotomy in trying to balance this particular aspect of it.
Well, Sabrina, I would say yes to that, except that if there was some sense of a plan, that we knew there was going to be a crisis in staffing in long-term care. Somehow we knew there was going to be a crisis in terms of staffing for nurses, et cetera, and burnout. We should have seen that maybe a year ago. Or at least we could have started to talk about, here is the transition. Here's how we're going to manage this. We're not doing that either, really, effectively anyway. I mean, I know Rod Phillips is out there talking about, spending more money to get this, that, and the other thing, but they aren't getting at the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And I mean, this is obviously a crisis that's just been exacerbated by COVID anyway. But I think that's what, to Keith's point, that's kind of why it took so long for them to even mandate it for people in long-term care, obviously the most vulnerable population. And I do think that they are in a very tricky position now, because we are already losing like hundreds of nurses. They're being put on leave because they're not getting vaccinated. And I don't know if the trade-off there is really worth it. And so obviously asking hospitals and experts, to weigh in such a public way, it kind of, lifts any responsibility or blame on you. And I don't know if it's so much, shirking responsibility, is that I do think like this government now in particular is kind of frozen from doing anything bold. Like even today, we're going to hear about, the next step of reopening, and it's a bunch of leaks. Like it's like these trial balloons that they're floating to see, people's reaction, and then they'll change it accordingly. Again, it's a Friday afternoon news dump. So I think that there is a lot to weigh here. But at the end of the day, time is ticking, and they're just getting hammered by the opposition parties, shutting down those private members' bills to mandate the vaccine. So I think, it's just giving their opposition more room to be criticized, to get criticized. And they're going to have to do something sooner or later.
I'm going to go back to the idea, and John framed it really well in terms of standing on your principles. We're at a point where it would appear to me as though the conservative movement generally doesn't know what it is in this country.
Well, here's something ironic. The conservatives are aligned with the unions that are opposed to the mandates. So the premier skipped question period on Thursday to go speak to the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police Association, which, like many police associations, is opposed to the mandates. That's a circle I never would have seen squared before.
Well, no, but I come back to I don't understand this. I just don't. we have approximately 13% of the people in this country, and it's not any more magnified in Ontario, who don't want to get a vaccine. And the last time I checked, in order to win a majority government in this province or in this country, you need the other people. You need all of those other people who are getting the vaccine. So at what point are you playing on the margins for what? I don't know. Ask Nick Kouvalis, who does all the polling for the Conservatives. He would estimate in the last campaign federally that it cost the Conservatives 24 seats in the province of Ontario or something like that. I have a different point of view, but the reality is that it didn't necessarily cost you 24 seats because of those extra PPC voters. It's just that you didn't convince the people in the 905 region that they should vote for you more. I mean, that's where the writings were that they needed to get. The fact that they came out and said, assault rifles shouldn't be dealt with is more to a reason why the 905 went offside and went for the Liberals than it was anything to do with the PPC and anything that they did. So you can't argue that with me. I always look at this and sort of say, look, it's not who you have as your base. You can always have your base at 28% or 26%. It's the next 12 to 14% that really matter. And they're not part of you. They're not part. So to that point, Ford is going to potentially lose more people who are not part of who those percentages are if he stands where he is, rather than moving forward because he needs the 905, because he needs to make sure that Del Duca doesn't make any inroads. He needs those people, and they're not the people who are already under the hood in the car. And that's what I find the dichotomy here.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any sensible political capital in some of these postures, Sabrina. One thing that we were talking about before we started, and Keith pointed out, the NDP are having their annual gathering this weekend. It was the Liberals last weekend, and Mr. Del Duca talking about all kinds of things, trying to grab headlines and talking points, and I thought he was fairly successful because we did talk about them. I'm not sure how much of an effect it's going to have on whether or not people vote Liberal. What do you expect that we might hear from the New Democrats this weekend?
They've been teasing some of their platform pledges a little bit piecemeal, as the Liberals have as well. So I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that. I don't know if we're going to have, any big, bold promises, which actually I'm kind of hungry for from the NDP. Like, I think that they need to, obviously we heard really big, bold promises from Stephen Del Duca. So I think that they're going to have to do something. He's proposing 4-day work week pilot, ranked ballots, which, the argument is that would benefit his own party. But, those are big, bold promises. I don't know if that will bring voters over to his camp, but I think, Andrea needs to do something like that. She's been leader for, she's been doing this for a decade, and she hasn't been doing so hot in the polls lately. So I think this is a chance to really rally her troops before 2022.
But again, John, back to your point, beyond appealing to the base of the NDP, Andrea Horwath's in the same place that Doug Ford has to be, and that is to say, I need to find somebody who's going to join the group, come into the tent.
She needs to appeal to the place where she can get the most votes, and that is the suburban areas around the province. And I'm not exactly sure how she's going to be able to make much more inroads. I mean, to Sabrina's point, what are we going to do? She's going to announce that they're going to a 2-day work week. Really, they've already tried. And look, I was also one who believed that there was an approach that, even look at Rachel Notley. She's not your average NDPer. She actually had to tack to the center and a little bit to the right on a few issues in order to capture those people. And I have to argue that the NDP in the province of Ontario did do that, but it was their own union people that took them down. I mean, they might have been able to get away with some of this stuff and move a little bit more to that center, but she's now forced more to the left. And I don't know where she's going to go with this, except she's going to make Doug Ford the ballot question. She's going to take all of the things that he's all bad for, and she's just going to line it all up and say, do you want more of that? But to Sabrina's point and to Keith's point, she's been in that role now for is this her third election campaign? That's a long time to be leader of a party, and at fourth. Sorry, see it just. There you go, a 2-day work week, and I forget things.
It's a 5-day weekend you got going there, John.
Yeah, that's right. So I think it's up. I think at the end of this campaign, regardless, it will be time for renewal for the NDP, because otherwise they will have run out of ideas. And it's time for probably her to be looking for something else. So we'll see.
Dave, before we go, I just wanted to say one last thing. Give the government high marks for something. I don't know the official name of the bill. I would think it's probably something along the lines of the Right to Pee Act. But now drivers are going to be able to go to the bathroom at any place they're delivering to, any business they're delivering to. I really think that's a winner. Like, I'm sorry, but there's been some tough time for truck drivers in the last 18 months. This one, I think, is a really good, smart bill.
Yeah, doing your business on business, something like that.
Doing your business in a place of business.
Indeed. Sabrina, we won't let you, won't even ask you to venture into that puerile discussion. But we'll just say thanks for joining us this week, and we always enjoy reading the Queen's Park Observer. Keep it coming.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Sabrina, John Wright, Keith Leslie, I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge. It's the Ontario Politics Podcast. It's an Eye Contact production.